Hi, welcome to the bathtub. This is the old masturbator, Scott Bradfield. Calling grandma, get the kids. We're back into, this is a family-friendly show. We're not going to use words like effing and whatever. We said some things in the past which we regretted as soon as we said them. But most of the time, this is a family-free thing, a family-free bathtub. And everyone, the family that bathes together stays together. You know the old expression. And a little itchy nose. I try not to blow my nose too much. We're doing this as a follow-up to our last couple of episodes where we kind of wandered through the top 100 books of the new century, of the 21st century. Because the New York Times couldn't wait till the end of the century to come up with the best books of the 21st century, so they wait. So like 2024, we're already doing this, having these ridiculous conversations. But the only point of doing lists is to kind of remind ourselves of books and kind of mix things up a bit. So what I thought I would do here is a couple of people mentioned to me books that they wished had seen that had been on the list. They couldn't believe were on the list, and I had to say, absolutely. There's one person said, "Why wasn't?" I mean, I was surprised to actually think about this. Why wasn't it Thomas Pynchon's Inherent Vice on the best books of the 100 of the century, 21st century? The 100 best books. This is one of the 10 best books of the 21st century. Inherent Vice is one of the greatest novels and most beautiful and rereadable novels. We've talked about it a lot here. And when they said that, this is 2000. Oh my gosh, my glasses. 2009? Jeez, it seems like it was long ago than that. Anyway, 2009 for this fabulous book. Yeah, it should be on that list. So what we've done here is put together a list of books that weren't on the list that should have been on the list. Totally another pointless list, but this damn well should have been on the 100 best books of the New York Times 21st century, okay? Inherent Vice should have definitely been in it. And I also thought, as soon as I thought of that, a book we haven't talked about, we talked a lot about Inherent Vice, Bleeding Edge. I really want to reread this in the bathtub soon. I read it not too long ago, 2013, and it's a great novel. It's the only novel about 911, I think, that's just actually about 911 and is worth reading. Anyway, that should have been on the list. So these are books that should have been on the list that weren't on the list, okay? That's the whole premise. Now I got to double check the years here. This is a book I've been intending to talk about this book for a while because we were going to do more. We planned to do more episodes about James Tiptree Jr. And James Tiptree Jr. was this amazing kind of SF writer, fantastic writer from the 80s and 90s was her biggest years, when she did some great short stories. She published under the name James Tiptree Jr. and I think Raccoona Sheldon. Her real name was Alice B. Sheldon. This is one of the best biographies I've read in the 21st century. It's by Julie Phillips. It's called The Double Life of Alice B. Sheldon. And as far as nonfiction of the 21st century, this is a fabulous book. Even if you don't like science fiction or you don't even like Tiptree's stories, which you should like some of them. She's wrote a lot of really complicated, sometimes and brilliantly various types of stories. It's a book I think should have been on that list. So these are books we wish had been on the list that didn't quite make it. So I'm not even mentioning my favorite, like books like Franzen. I like Franzen. I think he should be on the list. I think the Cormac McCarthy's The Road should have been on it, but we're not even going to talk about those, okay? I just put this as a placeholder. What you're going to find from my list is that they're not really the best. I don't think of these as the best books, really, so much as the best writers of the 21st century. And in my retro vision of the world of literature, most of those are 20th century writers who carried on their careers into the 21st. Does that make sense? So, for example, here's one. Here's one that should have been on the list. The Separation, Christopher Priest. Christopher Priest, my favorite of Christopher Priest books. That's 2002. It's the one about the twins who go off into two different timelines of history. I can't tell you more than that because it's quite a puzzle and an absorbing puzzle. Now, Chris Priest wrote from the 70s through the 2000s and into the 2019-20. I think he was publishing even up into 2020-21. So all of those, I'm not just saying The Separation is one of the 100 best books, but Priest is one of the 100 best people worth reading from the 21st century. And almost all his books that he published in the 21st century and before are worth reading, especially The Separation. Alison Lurie is another kind of good example. I put this up, The Last Resort. I was one of the few people that gave this a great review. I loved this book. The Last Resort. She published another book called Truth and Consequences. And I forget the year, but it was like in the 2000s. That was her last novel. She was still writing great novels right up in her late 70s and 80s. And I just put this up to say that she was still a great writer. And her book, Truth and Consequences, her last novel is as good as anything she wrote. It's a lot of fun, and it deserves to be on that silly list. Here's another good example of that. So I'm just putting this up as an example. Night Gaunts by Joyce Carol Oates and Other Tales of Suspense. The title story is a Lovecraftian story about Lovecraft. Lovecraft is the sort of character in it. And it's like 4 novellas or 5 novellas. I love Joyce Carol Oates short stories. And in the 21st century, as well as the 20th century, she has been one of the best American short story writers. I think most of her novels are too long, and I kind of find most of her novels kind of exhausting. I've kind of given up reading her novels. But I've never read a short story of hers I didn't like, and I really like her horror story collections like this. And she did another one called Haunted, and another one called Collector of Hearts, which were in the 90s. But she's done so many short story collections. I mean, dozens and dozens probably in the 21st century. Every one I've read I've liked, but I particularly liked Night Gaunts. Here's another example. These are old farts. I'm not up with the new guys. I don't know the new people very well at all. The old farts are always my favorite farts, and that's Tom Disch. His best novels were all published in the 90s, really. But in the 2000s, before his tragic death, he wrote these wonderful novellas. These are some of my favorite books of the 21st century. Proteus and Proteus Sails Again, The Voyage of the Proteus, and the Further Adventures at the End of the World, Proteus Sails Again. And these were small press from Subterranean Press. They're kind of autobiographical stories about living past the end of the world with Tom Disch and his friends, or his characters he hangs out with. Wonderful, wonderful stories. And Tom was also writing in the 21st century, besides his wonderful website I think it was called Dead Zone. His last collection of poetry is my favorite. His most personal, his most moving. Tom Disch, about the size of it. Lovely, lovely book of poetry. And reminds me, I wanted to put a couple poetry books on here, and I probably have forgotten to put them on, because our bathing buddy Bob Black, it's a tongue twister, bathing buddy Bob Black, reminded me there was no poetry on the stupid New York Times list. But there's one. We'd probably like to put others on there, but I'm not going to probably do it. I'm sorry. I probably screwed that up. All right. Anyway, Tom Disch's stories, his poems from the 21st century are all terrific, as well as his last collection of stories, The Wall of America. That's from our buddies at Tachyon Press. Okay, here's a young fart. I don't have any young farts on here. These are almost all old farts from the 20th century who managed to keep doing well into the 21st century. Brian Evenson, Immobility, was probably one of the best novels I read in the 21st century. This is a galley, bound galley. It is 2012. I had him come to my class, my online class, and we talked about this book. It knocked us all out. It's a great, dark, it's very Beckett, like it's Samuel Beckett at the end of the world. Very funny, very dark, like all of Evenson's work. And it's a hilarious, brilliant novel. It's one of the best novels I read in the 21st century. And Brian, he's a young fart. One of the few young farts. I think I've had one more young fart in here. We'll get to them soon. Old farts, but the writer's not an old fart. Blake Bailey, he's a biographer, had some controversy in his biography of Philip Roth. He wrote one of my favorite biographies of all time, and my favorite biography probably of the 21st century. Is A Tragic Honesty, The Life and Work of Richard Yates, the great Richard Yates. Wonderful book, and I'm in it. It's one of the few great books I'm actually mentioned in because I interviewed Yates before he died, and he uses that very well. Oh, here's a new Brian Evenson book coming out, by the way. Good Night, Sleep Tight. We're going to talk about it in our new book segments real soon. But all of Brian Evenson's books from the 21st century. It's not just that one. That's just a sample. Immobility is one of my favorites, but still, it's one of the samples. Here's another one. A writer I've loved all through my period. During my tenure in the 20th century was William Trevor. Could do no wrong. I never read a bad short story by William Trevor. His novels, not quite as good. But in the 21st century, he wrote a lot of collections. I just brought out some samples. 2007, Cheating at Canasta, the end of his life. Great book. A Trevor novel, short story collections should have been on that stupid list. And one of his great novels from the 2000s was The Story of Lucy Galt. Really liked that a lot. We've talked about these in previous episodes, but these should have been on that list. Love and Summer. I think that's his last novel. I really enjoyed his last novel. And then his last collection of stories, which is appropriately called Last Stories. It came out posthumously, and I reviewed this book. We talked about it in an ancient episode. But these are some of the great books of the 21st century that should have been on that dumb list. Here, we're jumping ahead a little bit here. Okay. And this is I'm still working on this, so I won't say too much about it. I'm working on a piece about a woman named Sanora Babb, who was a writer in the 30s. She wrote her first book in the 30s, and it was called Whose Names Are Unknown. It's considered by many, and I think they're probably right from what I can see so far, the great book about the Dust Bowl, the great novel about the Dust Bowl. And she was featured, I guess, in one of those Ken Burns documentaries, which I have not seen, but it did, because I'm doing a piece on this new biography of hers, which is very good so far, by Iris Jamal Dunkel, Sanora Babb. We'll be doing a lot more about her. But here's an old fart writer, really old fart, 1930s or 40s. But this book, because for various reasons, mainly because it came out, she finished writing it for her editor, Bennett Cerf, after The Grapes of Wrath was published. So she kind of got crowded out of her own. Basically, they said, "Oh, we can't do this. It's the same as Grapes of Wrath." It's not. It's all set in the Dust Bowl. It's people who lived there. It's like Sanora Babb. It is a really, really well-written book. It's quite just eye-opening how powerful she writes about these people and their lives and how difficult it was. And she wrote them from the inside. And she actually Steinbeck came out researching and worked with her to get research for his book. We'll talk more about Sanora Babb soon, but 21st century, I think the old farts belong in the 21st century as much as anybody. And I think that's the last one I had. I wanted to put down a couple of poetry books just because I totally agree with Bob about that. But at the moment, I don't want to ruin this by coming up with one of the various books of poetry I have here. But I'll mention them in the next episode. I'll put up a couple because there's a couple I particularly liked. I just want to make sure they came out in the 2000s so we don't screw up the game. All right. We'll do a slight addendum. There's my set of books. Oh, there's one more. Here's one more by a young fart. There is a young fart. There was a book I really enjoyed on Kindle that I got from my son at one point. He was going through something. And I really enjoyed this book. It's called How to Live, or A Life of Montaigne in One Question and 20 Attempts at an Answer by Sarah Bakewell. Make sure I got that right because it's not helping me. Sarah Bakewell. It came out about 10 years ago. And I read it on Kindle, and I can't really show it to you because Kindle's not helping me. They keep sending me back to the pages. Hold on. There you go. How to Live, or A Life of Montaigne, which is it's one of those books that kind of does something besides just give you the dates of a person's life. She basically argues that he went through this terrible grief over the loss of a friend, and everything he wrote and everything he did after that was trying to deal with his grief and the sadness. And it's kind of a really powerful way of looking at a book, a biography. In the same way that the Raccoon Sheldon book, it takes that kind of, there's a sort of twist in a doubling in this woman's character, who's a fascinating, brilliant woman, and brings it a little more to life to me. I think there's some wonderful biographies. Okay, happy bathing. Here's some books you can take into your bathtub. I'd recommend them before a lot of the 90% of the books on the New York Times list. And it's our contribution to a complete, unimportant controversy. Bye.